Hi, my name is Mary Jane Hockey, and I'm a tattoo artist in Portland, Oregon. I've been tattooing since 1978, first with Burt Grimm, and then later in my own studio, Dermal in downtown Portland. I've been there for over 40 years. And it's my pleasure today to share with you the life of Elizabeth Weinzierl. The first time I ever walked into a tattoo studio was 1978, and I went into Burt Grimm's shop in Old Town. He and his wife Julie were living in the back of the shop and tattooing in the front. Directly across the street for them was Duke and Dee Dee Brown. They ran Portland Tattoo. Inside Portland Tattoo, there was ever-changing number of artists. Don Nolan was one, Rio de Janeiro another, Christine the Colorful. Madame Lozanga worked there. There was a free exchange of people back and forth between those shops because there was plenty of skin to go around. One of the people that started going to both of these shops was an elderly widow with piercings and tattooed named Elizabeth Weinzierl. She was the state medical examiner's wife, and she had been getting tattooed from Burt Grimm for 40 years. She was the first world's greatest tattoo fan. She was a collector that communicated with people the world over. She is solely responsible for the beginnings of the National Tattoo Association in 1978. She walked into my studio in 1981 and introduced herself. I knew her instantly. She was a celebrity in my world, and I remember going to close my door and lock it and ask her to please sit on the couch. And I turned around, and she was hiking her dress up over her head, and she was buck naked underneath, except for the two dolphins jumping across her ass. She whirled around displaying a gigantic spider web with tarantulas and flies in it, and sat down naked on my velour couch to have a little chat. She had a problem. It's my spider. He's dying. He's starving to death. She wanted me to tattoo a bunch of flies in there to give him something to eat. Well, I don't know what you think an 80-year-old belly looks like, but it was nothing that I could physically tattoo. It's very thin and crepey. So I told her it wasn't something that I would be able to do for her. And she understood right away, and it became clear to me that she just wanted to be able to say, my spider's starving and he needs something to eat. And that was the beginning of Elizabeth Weinzierl, an eccentric, intelligent, gregarious, totally exhibitionistic woman. She taught me more about friendship, spunkiness, heart, and the way you should pick your friends as carefully as you pick your tattoos. In 1981, I did a thesis at the Portland Art Museum. I was a painting sculpture major, and my thesis was on tattooing. My thesis committee was thrilled. It was something different. Tattoos are kinetic, movable sculptures. And so they signed on, and I decided I'd need to go way out of the box. So I did no black outlines, just auras and feelings, and tattooed all of these women and two men. And they stood in person at my art opening at the Portland Art Museum. My canvases were flesh canvases, and I remember my parents coming and being pretty embarrassed about the whole affair. They were terribly afraid. One of their friends would say, "And what's that daughter of yours up to?" And they'd have to confess what I was doing. But while they were there, feeling uncomfortable, they saw this cute little granny. And they walked over to her, and she said hello and introduced herself. And my mother asked, "Do you know where the bathroom is here?" Uh-oh, I knew what was going to happen. Elizabeth took my mother into the bathroom, and before you could say lickety-split, she pulled her skirt up and her pants down, and I had to lead my mother out by the hand. She was speechless, but I do have to say, I looked pretty conservative to her after that night. As her 90th birthday approached, National Tattoo Association decided to make a big display. There was a campaign, and she received so many cards and so many bouquets of flowers that the people in her senior center thought she'd passed away. But she didn't care what they thought. She was just happy to be the center of everything again. The next year, when the same thing didn't happen on her 91st birthday, she was devastated. She moved in with her daughter, Henrietta, at the coast and began to say goodbye, just like my mother did 10 years later. She called her friends, had a couple of bites of ice cream, and said, "I'll see you on the other side." She was gone, but Elizabeth Wines Earle will never be forgotten. She's always been one ahead of the curve, one about communication, but also standing out. She was always a standout on every level, and it's my pleasure to introduce this film, The World's Greatest Tattoo Fan. And I hope you enjoy it.
When we got married, Adolf didn't care for animals. He never did like, I guess he grew up in a family of bacteriologists, and you don't have things around like that. They got germs. So my mother kept the parrot, and when she moved to California, parrot went too. And there's a couple down there that she knew up here, and they finally got the bird because she couldn't handle him too much, a home all alone all the time. And he lived, oh boy, he was the king of that family. They had a...
Wrought iron too?
No, they had a cage for him, sure, but they didn't have him in the cage. He ate at the table with them. He had a little, it's not a roost, what do you call it?
Perch.
Perch, thank you. He had a perch at the table, and he had one in the car. He was just like a kid. And that bird could sing, he could talk, he could do the multiplication tables, he could spell. He learned everything I learned. I'd have to go 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 2 is 4, and pretty soon Polly's doing that. And one day my uncle, my mother's sister's husband, came to visit us, a Methodist minister, and he was going to be the guest speaker at the Methodist church not too far away where I used to go to Sunday school. And he came in, it was night, and we had the parrot on the laundry trays. The laundry trays were in the kitchen in the apartment we lived, and they had a cover on them, so they served several duties, and the cage was on that. And he had this old red sweater around him. It was time to go to bed. Uncle Chesley put his hat on top of the cage, and we didn't think anything about it. Come morning, he goes to pick up his nice black derby hat, and all he's got's a crown, the rim's all gone. Poor Uncle Chesley, he was in a dither. He couldn't go to church without a hat. What's he gonna do? And my dad's hats didn't fit him. And my dad says, well, I can take you out and you can buy a hat. Not on Sunday, you don't. So my mother got an old Panama hat of my dad's, and she steamed and she stretched and she stretched and she steamed and she stretched, and it got so it almost fit him. Well, she could do all that work, but he couldn't go out and buy a hat. But it was all right for her to work, to stretch a hat so he could have a hat to wear to church. I don't see it.
Grandma's kind of special because of her tattoos, and because of that, my kids, her great-grandchildren, can go to a bookstore and find their grandmother. I mean, she's not going to disappear. And what's fun, you know, what's fun for the kids is they go to the bookstore and can find them, and their buddies can't find their grandma. She's not there. So that makes her kind of special. And she's in a wide variety of books, art books, history books, tattoo books. Just got to know where. She turns up quite a few places. It's kind of amazing.
I can remember one time, this is my ex-husband now, one time on the morning show that we listened to here in town, was during one of the conventions, and they were remarking about the picture of a little old grandma from Portland being tattooed, and you know, they were making some remarks about the little old tattooed grandma. I said to my husband, I said, they can't talk about my mama like that.
I liked it when she was in the Gresham Outlook on the front page, and I walked in the grocery store. They said, did you see that old lady with the tattoos? I really floored the one clerk when that's my grandmother.
Everybody, or a lot of people, like being in the celebrity world of some sort. And like I've said before, my mother loved everything that was an attention getter. One of my boys one time, who was in the subservice, was filing through a Playboy. And he says, oh look, here's my grandmother. And nobody would believe him.
Elizabeth Weinzierl is the world's #1 tattoo fan. Born on June 2nd, 1902 in Brooklyn, New York, she moved west with her family to Seattle in 1913. For the past 40 years, she has been one of the greatest celebrities in the entire world of tattooing and has done more than anyone else to unite tattooers and their fans in the several existing associations. However, tattooing was not Elizabeth's first national publicity. That came in 1918 when she, her mother, and her cousin made a celebrated and previously unheard of cross-country trip from Seattle to Brooklyn and back again. Newspaper stories of the day described the amazing adventures of the three women and their dog Jerry, crossing the country in a flivver. This was a day when all roads west ended at Chicago, and travelers were forced to rely on the Lincoln Highway, a series of markers which were reached by following often unreliable directions. One news story of the day contained the following statement by Elizabeth's mother. One of the most interesting stops was at Salt Lake City. We found when we entered civilization that we were treated like a circus. Everyone turned out to see the queer women in men's clothes. It was quite amusing. At LaSalle, a man from the back country, I presume, probably never in his life saw a woman in trousers, was so shocked that he ran his old gray mare halfway up the telegraph pole looking after us.
There were no maps, and we bought 2 books. One was for the Lincoln Highway. I don't know it was just called Lincoln Highway, and I don't know what number it carries now. And we had a blue book from Seattle to Salt Lake. There's where we picked up the Lincoln Highway. And that would tell you, as all 3 books we had did, we'd set our speedometer to the reading in there if we did any fooling around, riding around after we parked. And you'd go so many miles, go 45 miles, bear left, or take the middle fork, or something like that. There were no signposts, but you went the way the wheel tracks went. Excuse me. So that's how we found our way most of the time. And I think it was in Nebraska, the road was on an old abandoned railroad bed. And I don't know what we'd done if we'd passed a car, because you know, railroad track's not very wide. But we made it. As we drove, we always looked for schoolyards to stay at night, because there was a pump and there were outdoor toilets, and these little one-room schoolhouses had stoves, and there was usually bits and pieces of wood around so we could cook our meal. We had a funny little grate thing that we put in the ground and put the fire underneath, and we'd cook our meals that way. And this is also in Nebraska. It was raining. It was thunder and lightning and raining. Schoolhouses, there weren't any. We didn't see any along that road until here's a nice great big brick one. And we stopped, but it was all locked up. We couldn't get in. So we went along a little further, and we usually stopped at farms and got eggs and milk and stuff. And we stopped in this farmyard and knocked at the door, and we asked if they had any milk and eggs they would sell us. Oh, sure, where are you from? And got to visiting, because we had a sign on the car, Seattle to New York, and Seattle to New York, yeah, or bust. I think that's what it said. He got interested, and we said something about, no, where are all the schoolhouses? The only thing we saw was this brick one. We couldn't get into it. And he says, well, there aren't very many around here. They're out further and not along the highway. But that's high school, and that's all locked up. And he said, we always stopped in those places. He said, well, do you smoke? No. Do you need to cook? Light a fire? No, we don't need to. We just have some cold milk and open something. And he says, well, we've got fresh hay, new hay in the barn. You can sleep up in the loft if you like. So, okay, that was better than out in the rain. So we slept there, and in the morning he came out, and he brought us some more milk, and he brought us a loaf of bread that his wife had baked. We visited some more, and he said, good thing you didn't stop at that schoolhouse. Couldn't get in. We said, why? It got struck by lightning last night. One night this was in Montana too, it was raining and it was cold, and we slept, our tent was no good for that, and we slept in an abandoned railroad car, and it was just boxcar. It was on the siding, and there was no track over here and no track over here, and we wondered how it got there. So we felt it would be safe, and we took our stuff up in the car, and Jerry and the parrot. I had a parrot then too. And we slept there. It was very comfortable. We were out of the wind and rain. And in the morning when we cooked in there too. Not much, but we had a little meal there. And we couldn't get the car started. It was just, and we always took, in those days they had coils in the car. And at night we would take them to bed with us in the cold weather just so they wouldn't get damp or wet and cold, you know. We put them in, but we couldn't start the car, so Gus said, I'm going to build a fire under the car. And my mother said, to build a fire? He said, we're not going to stay here all day. So he made a little fire and pushed it under there and got the coals under and watched it. And every once in a while he'd turn the crank or I'd turn the crank, and one of these times, whoops, it went. So we let it run there for a little while, then moved the car off the away from the fire, and we put it out, and we were on our way. So you don't always start a car that way, but we did. And we got quite an education in looking in the outdoor houses, you know, all kinds of poetry on the walls. And of course, there was one for the boys and one for the girls. And when Nellie and I'd come out, and Gus would come out, well, what'd you learn? We'd trade stories. Wouldn't do that nowadays, I guess, so.
In 1920, Elizabeth enrolled at the University of Washington. This was in a day when only one woman in 1,000 completed college. There she met a young medical student, Adolph Weinzierl, and after a proper courtship, they were married, and they lived in Seattle, where he became the deputy health officer. In 1937, he, Elizabeth, and their 3 daughters moved to Portland, where Dr. Weinzierl was both the city health officer and chairman of the Department of Public Health at the medical school.
They were a very loving, touching, kissing couple all of the time. My mother was a patter, and my dad would put his arms around her and look into her eyes and, you know, be a really loving person. And, you know, I can't remember what the words were, but a lot of love from that man to her, and back, too. My mother doing the tattoos was an adventure for her. And fun. And looking back, it's probably nice that they had that adventure together. Something special for them. My dad's hobby was photography. And even long before the tattoo became a part of their life, he would take pictures. They'd go down into the basement where they, see, in the basement was kind of a party room. And they would go down there and he would take pictures, and yes, he would pose her or she would pose. And, you know, the scantily clad pictures for them were a product of some of those evenings down in the party room. My sisters were probably more affected by the tattoos than myself. My sister, Liz, is more socially oriented than I am, and I think it was a problem for her.
I always wondered if it was just a little bit kinky on their part. I mean, 20 years ago, maybe kinky. My mother never shared it with us. It was a secret thing for her. And so we knew very little about it. I thought maybe it was a little bit of a stimulant for them. They were physically close, but I think words were very hard for them. I think that my dad would like to have had just the normal average lady that was sociable in the neighborhood, acceptable in the neighborhood, and that's what I think. That everybody should do their own thing. I mean, I certainly do mine, and if that was what was important to her, that's all right with me. And like I said before, I've never felt like I needed them, but she did.
I think Elizabeth has changed some, or Babe as she's called in the family, or Liz as she prefers to be called. I think she has grown up a little bit, and it's a part of me, and I'm no different than I was before I had them. And people seem interested in them. It's opened up a whole new world to me, and I'm thankful I had it to do. I had this contact after he left. What would I have done? Just kids and all, you know. I wasn't a PTA goer. I did when they were in school, but I wasn't much of a organization gal, shall we say. But it was easy to write to people all over. And I wouldn't have known these and made these contacts. I wouldn't have known you if I hadn't.
That's true.
And so many wonderful people I've met because I am tattooed I wouldn't have done. They've opened up the world, you might say, for me, as far as meeting new people. And it's always good to meet new people.
Tattooing opened a whole new world for Elizabeth, and it became a remarkable world indeed. For over 4 decades, she has corresponded with tattooers throughout the world. Many refer to her as the grandmother of tattooing, and a Japanese tattooist claims that Elizabeth is his adopted mother. Tattooers now recognize that it was Elizabeth's interest in their art and her correspondence with individuals throughout the world that first brought the tattooing community together.
The two on my arms are my favorites. But the inner one, the inner part of that was a design that was sent to me, I think by Beverly, or maybe she had it or did it, I don't remember, Beverly Robinson. And it was a bird, and I liked that. And we sent it down to Bert, and said we'd like that next time we came down, what could he do with it? So when we got down there, he had it all drawn out, and he embellished it a little bit with more wreaths and flowers or something around it. And I said, okay, I like that. And so he got his little toothpick and dunked it in the ink, and he made 4 little spots, and that was his guide for putting that on. And we were very pleased with him. He put one on both arms. And the next time we saw him, he said, they look kind of naked. They need some more trimming around them. So that's when he put the other outer design around the central bird thing. For the most part, sleeves hide it. And it's in a place where I can control it. That was Adolph's worry. Oh, no, you don't want that. You can't. It'll be always showing. I said, no, it won't. I can wear a long sleeve if I have to. So it didn't bother me. I matured.
You're matured.
I matured. I grew up. Just like when these people say, oh, you got horrible tattoos. And I said, you got some of that horrible paint on your face. I think I like these on my arms the best because they show and I can shock people a little bit. Oh, they see this. And I said, well, see this. That's fun. But the first one Bert did was the parrot, and I liked that because it was like my Polly that I didn't have anymore. My poor Polly. Poor Polly'd sit out on the fire escape, and the thunderstorm would come by, and we shut all the windows, and we'd forget about Polly, and pretty soon you'd hear, Polly, poor Polly, Polly, poor Polly. Oh, we didn't bring the parrot in, so we'd get the parrot in, and my mother would take him out and put him in a towel and wipe him all down, you know. Nice Polly, poor Polly. But poor Polly got left on the fire escape a couple of times. So I like the parrot because it reminds me of my parrot. Then we used to go and get frog eggs, you know. It'd be a mass, like in a mass of jelly or something, and full of these little things that look like eyeballs of a fish. And we'd bring those home, and we'd watch them develop and grow and break out of that, and here these little things are squirting all over. And I guess I kind of like tadpoles. That's why I got these little tadpoles. We always had fun. We'd go out in the woods and find a pond and a sieve and a goldfish bowl and fill it full of water and get this mass in. Kids like to watch them. And if I could find a pond around here in the spring, I'd go bring some home and watch again.
While Elizabeth had a few small tattoos done in the Northwest, she became a serious collector only after meeting Bert Grimm. Elizabeth and Adolph began a friendship with Bert and Julia Grimm of St. Louis, which was to last for over 30 years. Adolph's annual trips to medical conventions were routed through St. Louis so Elizabeth could get more tattoos. For the rest of Bert's life, Elizabeth collected only his work.
We're standing out on the sidewalk, and you know how Bert walked. He came out. You folks strangers in town? Yeah. Where are you from? Portland, Oregon. Oh, Portland. I was born someplace near there. Canby, I think. And I left home when I was old enough to wear shoes. And that was our introduction to Bert. And Adolph told him that, yeah, we were thinking about getting a tattoo, but I couldn't stand that shooting gallery. He says, well, if anybody wants to shoot, they can come back. So we went in, and we visited, met Julie, and I picked out this parrot, and that was it. And the next morning when I got up there, as I say, it's history. I said, no more unless Bert does them. And the Adolf part was done with Adolf. And he put it here. And so the next day I said, hey, it doesn't show. And then so that's why this one isn't centered the way it should be, because he did this one first. Then I was down there. Maybe that's when I went to Vegas. I came home and I said, Bert, it looks a little lonesome. Why don't you fix it up? And that's when he did this. And I didn't say anything to Adolf. And he met me at the airport. And I said, oh, I got some new work. And he says, where? And he was driving, and I pulled my sleeve off, and he pretty near ran off the road.
Once Elizabeth decided to go public with her wristband, her conventional life as a doctor's wife and mother soon became most unconventional. In 1958, Elizabeth and Adolf were featured in the national Linkletter television show On the Go, which originated from Bert Grimm's shop on the Pike in Long Beach, California.
Good morning. Today's show just might get under your skin.
It's Jack Linkletter on the go. Come on along. We're going places, doing things, and meeting people everywhere in their search for happiness.
Well, why are people tattooed? Is it a whim, a dare, a moment of weakness, or are they simply doing it for the decoration? Well, whatever the motive is, tattooing is one of the oldest of the living arts, dating way back, I don't know how many centuries. But today, over 500 tattoo artists are practicing here in the United States. Their selection is quite varied, their price is reasonable, and their product, well, it's usually guaranteed. We're here today with Bert Grimm, who's been in the business some 45 years, his wife Julia, who's been in the business 28 years, and their nephew Bob Heyman, who's a comparative novice. He's only been in the business 10 years. And their clients fall in every age bracket, in every walk of life. I'm sitting here with Dr. and Mrs. Weinzierl, and we have a little switch here. Mrs. Weinzierl has the tattoos, and the doctor doesn't. They live in Portland. They have been coming down here to Bert for the last 10 years. And I imagine you have quite a few tattoos after all these years.
Oh, yes, I have about 40.
And what kind of designs?
Oh, we have birds and butterflies and dragons.
Really? Do you have a
Flowers.
particular favorite, Doctor?
Yes, my favorite is the butterfly on the shoulder.
On which shoulder?
You like to see it?
Yes, let me see this. This is your favorite, right there.
That's right.
Well, that is very lovely. And why did you get your first tattoo?
Well, that kind of a long-winded story, but my father had a tattoo, which I was interested in. It aroused a little curiosity, and husband liked them, too.
We went up to Bob's place once following the Jack Linkletter show, the On the Go show, in which we were asked to come down. Bert suggested to them. And we went down, we're on the program, and Barbara wanted to know when we came up if I would mind showing them to the children, and I said, of course not. So when I got up there, we weren't there very long. Can we see your tattoos, Grandma? So I showed them what I had, you know, and we paid no more attention to it. They looked them over good, and asked questions, and I answered them, and then we started talking, and pretty soon, where are the kids? And they're all out in the yard, and they're using their Mongol pencils, and they're drawing on each other, designs.
I know that I asked my son once, terrible, I shouldn't say this. I said, have you ever touched Grandma's tattoos? And he said, yeah, they feel like skin. And a couple of days later, he says, you never have you, Mom? I said, no.
I think I was really aware of it when I was around, 10 to 12 years old. And they were pretty neat. Grandpa was really proud of them. He liked them. And it was my birthday, and they took me to Poncho's one year, and she had to wear a dress that showed off her parakeets.
The idea that my dad wanted a tattooed wife was a romanticized story. And I don't know how it started, why she felt that he wanted a tattoo wife. We'll never know what, goes on behind the closed doors. I don't think that it was anything that kept them together or kept them apart, either one way or the other. It was something they did together, my mother keeps saying. And that's true. That's one of the things they did together. I cannot imagine my dad saying, I want a tattooed wife.
He was a prolific reader, anything, and he loved words. And I think that was one reason why we went to the Westminster Presbyterian Church. They had a preacher there by the name of Hudson. And he'd often go, and first thing you know, out had come his little book, and he's writing down something. What'd you write down? Oh, well, be a word that Dr. Hudson had used that he didn't know the meaning of, or he didn't know the word. And get home, and he'd always look them up in the dictionary when we got home. He loved words. And lots of times I'd say, hey, don't use those 50-cent words, use a 2-bit word. Maybe a 10-cent word would be better.
Adolf was an artist in his own way. His love of words is reflected in the many letters he composed and sent to friends. Dear Dr. Williams, if you will turn on the signal light that burns with such a crimson glow just outside your office door, and if you will thrust strongly with your 2 hands against all those obligatory matters which clutter up your desk, then you can boldly, and as one who puts all considerations of guilt behind him, place this letter on the cleared space before you. It is the whimsical wish of your friend in the West that thereupon you will find it possible to slip right through this page as readily as Alice went through the looking glass, and find yourself visiting with him and springtime in Oregon. Adolf was also a pioneer. In 1948, a young Eddie Albert produced one of the first sex education films for teenagers. The film and Adolf as the medical advisor were prominently featured in a Life magazine story.
It was the first sex education movie probably made for the United States. Life magazine, I can remember picking it up and having quite a story on it. And that was probably a tougher time for me, so having that magazine out than my mother's tattoos and what the kids said to me.
You can't buy a life insurance policy that will leave your family with something to do or be taken care of any better when you're gone than what my grandfather did for my grandmother with the tattoos. He left her with a worldwide family, at the top of it, and that's, to me, is marvelous. You know, that's the neatest thing you can do for somebody, is not leave them alone, and that's essentially what he did. So that's something you can't buy. You got to be pretty creative to come up with something that'll beat that.
I don't know if Mom's changed her ideas at all about, how she feels about tattoos when she first had them, as to how it is now for her. I really have no concept if she's changed her mind about them. I don't think so, because, the biggest, one of the biggest pleasures, I think, besides talking to a couple of the grandchildren, especially, that are special to her, and keeping that contact, is going to the tattoo celebrations, the conventions, the shows, the parties. Loves it.
I went to the first meeting. I wasn't going to go, and a friend of mine in Boston and in Massachusetts asked if I was going. We'd been corresponding for a long time, he and Adolf and I. And he said, "Are you going to convention?" And I said, "No." He says, "Why not?" I said, "Well, I don't know anybody there." He says, "Well, you should go." And I said, "Well, I can't. I hadn't planned on that, and I don't have the money." He says, "Well, I'll send you the money." And I said, I don't take money from men." He says, "I'm not giving it to you for you. I'm giving this to you because Adolf would like you to have gone." And he said, "You make a reservation for 2 rooms and ask for a long a king-size bed, because I'm a tall fellow and I kind of sleep sideways in them. It's easy to stretch out straight." And he says, "I'll meet you there." And he sent me the money for my ticket. And I've been going ever since. Hadn't been for that, I wouldn't have started like this. So that was my first contact with people. And then this meeting that went to, they had their contest for the most tattoos and so forth, women and so forth. And they wanted me to enter, and I had seen the girls that were entering, and I said, "No, I couldn't do that." "Oh, yes, you got it." And I said, "No, I can't. I wouldn't compete against those girls." Now, maybe I had a big head or something or other. I was afraid that they wouldn't have a chance, because they just had a little bit here and a little bit there, and I had what I have now. And I didn't want to discourage people from getting tattooed, women. So I didn't. And after the meeting, after that contest was over, and the meeting was coming towards a close, he got up and said there was somebody that should have entered that contest and she didn't. And would Elizabeth Winslow please come up to the platform now? And I looked at, he says, "Go on, go." So I went, and it would have done Adolf's heart proud. He had really inflated the cheers and the applause and the whistles when I got up there on the platform.
Paul Rogers, I don't know why, but one day I was at a meeting and I heard somebody say, Grandpa wants a kiss." And I thought, who's calling Grandma around here? And I'm looking and I heard it again, and here comes Paul Rogers. He's got his arms out. Grandpa wants a hug and a kiss." And he pulled that several times. And one morning I got down there and I saw him come, and I said, "Hey, Grandpa wants a hug and a kiss." So we kind of got tagged on Grandpa.
Most everybody likes Mother. I really can't think of people who don't like her. Some people think she's the dearest person in the world. And sometimes she's ornery as heck.
I like the Japanese type of work, unless when they knit the skulls. I don't like these skulls. I don't mind the dragons, but I don't like skulls. I don't care who does them. I don't like skulls. But I like their waves, their chrysanthemums, and their flowers. They do beautiful work. That I like. I like pretty designs, and I don't think, some of those dragons, they're not very handsome either. Spitting fire, no. I like the pretty things.
In 1984, Elizabeth was brought to Japan to be featured on national television. This trip was one of many appearances for the Goodwill Ambassador of Tattooing, but it was the first TV appearance that required this octogenarian to obtain a work permit.
I don't know who sent my name in or how they got my name, but I was called, and then I received letters about coming to Japan to be on national television there. And they would pay all expenses, and I could take a companion. And then I got all sorts of things to sign and so forth. I'd get a worker's permit in Japan,
had to go to council here, and that was a big runaround. You'd go and it'd be noontime and they'd close everything, come back at 1 o'clock, and it was, it looked like they were trying to keep people out rather than keeping them, getting them to come to visit. But I finally got my worker's permit, and did I get a big hee-haw going through the customs there in Japan. Worker's permit. I said, yeah, what kind of working? He got a big joke out of that. Tattoo! Gonna be on a tattoo show. Oh, he passed it all around the people all around him. So, you see what they thought of tattooing. I never thought I'd end up with the amount of tattooing I had. You know, said he wanted a tattooed wife, and I thought one did it. But I am very happy that he wanted one, because it's led me to an entirely different world, and I have friends all over, wonderful friends, through tattooing that I would never have met otherwise.